Hello, and welcome to People of the Pod, brought to you by American Jewish Committee. Each week, we take you beyond the headlines to help you understand what they all mean for America, Israel, and the Jewish people. I'm your host, Manya Brashear-Pashman. Professor Eugene Kandel served as economic advisor to the Prime Minister of Israel from 2009 to 2015, and with Ron Sur is a co-founder of Israel's Strategic Futures Institute. He is also chairman of the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, the only public stock exchange in Israel, known locally as the Bursa. He is with us now to talk about the impact of Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza on Israel's economy, the potential and impact so far of the Abraham Accords, and how history could one day view October 7th as a turning point for Israel's democracy. Dr. Kandel, welcome to People of the Pod.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Before we begin, your family came to Israel in 1977. Can you share your family's aliyah story?
Yeah. When I was 14, my family was living very comfortably in the Soviet Union. My father was a quite known writer, playwright, a script writer. And around him was a group of Jewish people of culture that were quite known in their domains, mostly Jewish. And so at some point in 1967, he sort of had this vision and started studying Hebrew, about 1970. And then by 1973, when I was 14 years old, he came to me and said, look, your mom and I decided to immigrate to Israel. What do you think about it? And I said, I don't know what I think about it. Okay, if we want to immigrate, let's immigrate. I never felt too much belonging there. And so, unfortunately, the Soviet authorities had other ideas about that, so we spent 4 years as refuseniks. My father, together with Benjamin Fine, were the editors of the underground publication called Tarbut. And for people who did not live there, they put their names on it. So this was typewritten copies of Jewish Culture Monthly, and there were 2 names on it. You could go to jail for this. So my father was always a pretty brave man for his petite size, because during the Second World War, he was very, very hungry, to say the least. So he didn't really grow very much, but he's very big inside. And so the following 4 years were pretty tough on them because he couldn't work anywhere. Just like in McCarthy years in this country, people would give work to their friends and then publish it under their own name. That's what he did for his friends. And they would share the money with him or give him most of the money. There was a very, very brave people. And then, there was an incident where they wanted to send a message to my father to be a little less publicly outspoken. And so the 2 KGB agents beat me up. And that started a whole interesting set of events, because there was an organization in Chicago called Chicago Action for Soviet Jewry, Pamela Cohen. And I actually met Pamela when I was studying at the University of Chicago and thanked her. So they took upon themselves to harass Soviet cinema and theater and culture officials. And so they were so successful that at some point the Writers' League from Hollywood said that nobody will go to Moscow Film Festival unless they release us, because they do not want to associate with people who beat up children. I wasn't a child, I was 17 years old, but still. And that sort of helped. At least that's how we think about it. So it's worthwhile being beaten up once in a while, because if it lets you out, I would take it another time. And then we came to Israel in a very interesting time. We came to Israel 4 hours after Anwar Sadat left. So we came to a different Israel, on the brink of a peace agreement with Egypt. And so that was it. We came to Mevaseret Zion, which was an absorption center, a small absorption center. Today I actually live probably 500 yards from where we stayed, full circle. And today it's it's about 25,000 people town. And that's the story. In the middle, in between then and now, I served in the military, did 2 degrees at Hebrew University, did 2 degrees at the University of Chicago, served as professor at the University of Rochester, And then for 28 years, served as professor of economics and finance at the Hebrew University. So I keep doing these circles to places where I started.
You say you arrived 4 hours after Sadat's visit to Israel on the brink of a peace agreement with Egypt. Did that peace agreement live up to expectations?
Well, it depends what your expectations. If your expectation were continuing the war, it definitely did. Because, for the last 48 years, we didn't have any military activity between Israel and Egypt. We even have security collaboration to some extent. But if you're thinking about really peace that would translate into people-to-people peace, business-to-business peace, it did not generate that at all, because there was a very, very strong opposition on the street level and on the intellectuals level. It actually started to break a little bit, because today you can find analysts on Egyptian television that are saying that we are stupid because we don't collaborate with Israel. So it is allowed today. It's allowed to be said. In 20, 30 years from now, that person would have been ostracized and would never be allowed to speak. So there is some progress, but unfortunately, it's a huge loss for the Egyptian economy. For Israeli economy, it is probably also lost, but it's not. Israeli economy has a lot of alternatives in other countries. But Egyptians don't seem to be able to implement all the things that Israelis implemented a long time ago, whether it's water technologies, whether it's energy technologies, lots of stuff. And it's really, really unfortunate that we could have helped Egyptian people, the same people who rejected any relations with us. And that's a pity.
The next peace agreement that came was with Jordan in 1994, quite some time later. Did that peace agreement live up to expectations? And where were you in 1994?
1994 was a professor at the University of Rochester, so I wasn't involved at all. But again, it was a very, very similar story. It was the peace that was sort of forced from above. It was clearly imposed on the people despite their objections, and you saw demonstrations, and you still see. But it was clear, so leadership of Jordan, that Israel, in their case, is absolutely essential for the survival of the Hashemite dynasty, and the Israeli intelligence saved that dynasty many, many times. But again, it wasn't translated into anything economic, almost anything economic, until in the early 2000s, there were some plants in Jordan by Israeli businessmen that were providing jobs, etc. But I was privileged to be the first to go to Jordan together with American officials and negotiate the beginning of the gas agreement. We were selling gas to Jordan because Jordan basically going bankrupt because of the high energy costs. Jordan doesn't have its own energy apart from shale oil. And for some reason, they weren't able to develop that. But Israeli gas that we are selling to them as a result of what we started in 2012, I believe, are actually very important for the Jordanian economy. And if we can continue that and maybe connect our electrical grid, which is now in the works between the water energy system, and now maybe there is a possibility to connect the Syrian grid. If we have an agreement with Syria, it will help tremendously these countries to get the economic development much faster. And it will help Israel as well to balance its energy needs and to maybe get energy, provide energy, get electricity, provide gas. There's all these things where we can do a lot of things together if there is a will on the other side. There's definitely a will on the Israeli side.
In addition to gas, there was also water desalination agreements as well, right?
There was a Red to Dead project, which was to pump the water all the way from the Red Sea along the Arava Valley. And then there is a 400-meter or 500-meter drop. And so to generate electricity through that, desalinate that water that you pump, and then send that water to Egypt, send the electricity that was generated and not needed to Israel, and then dump the salt stuff into the Dead Sea. Frankly, I don't know where this project is. Nobody talks about it for the last 7, 8 years. I haven't heard. Now there are different projects where you would just get energy generated in Jordan and sold to Israel in a lot, for example, because it's difficult for us to bring electricity all the way south. And so if the Jordanians have large fields of photovoltaic energy, they can satisfy the needs of Eilat, and then in return we can desalinate water and send it to them. So there's all kinds of projects that are being discussed.
But Israel does provide water to Jordan, correct?
There are 2 agreements. One agreement, according to our peace agreement, we are supposed to provide them with a certain amount of water. I don't remember the exact amount. But that's not enough, and so we also sell them water. So think about it. There's a sweetwater reservoir called Tiberias, Kinneret, in the north. And we're sending water from there into 2 directions, according to the agreement. We're sending it to Amman, pumping it up to the mountains, and then we're sending it throughout the Jordan Valley, all the way along the Jordan River to the Jordanian side. So it's quite striking when I used to go between Jerusalem and Amman, it's actually an hour and a half drive. That's it. You go down, you go up, and you're there. And so when you're passing the Israeli side, you see the plantations of date palms that are irrigated with drip irrigation, so very, very economically, using the brackish salt water that is pumped out of the ground there. You cross 2 miles further, you see banana plantations that are flood irrigated at 50 centigrade weather, and the water that comes from them comes on an open canal. So basically 50% of the water that we send this way evaporates. And growing bananas in that climate and using so much water, it's probably, if you take into account the true cost of water, it's probably a money-losing proposition. But they're getting the water, the people that are, the settlements on that bank of Jordan River are getting it for free. So they don't care. And so if somebody would just internalize that, and instead of sending the water down in an open canal, would send the whole water up to Amman, where there is a shortage of water, enormous shortage of water. And then you would take the gravity and use that water to generate electricity, to clean that water, the sewage, clean it and drip irrigate plantations. Everybody would make enormous amounts of money, literally enormous amounts of money. And everybody's lives would be better. Okay, and I'm not talking about Israelis. It's like within Jordan. And you can't say that there's no technology for that, because the technology is 2 miles away. You can see it. And it just puzzles me, why wouldn't that be done by some entrepreneurs, Jordanian entrepreneurs? We could really help with that. We could just help by buying the water from them back. The water that we give them, we can buy it back, because in Israel, the water is very expensive. So we could finance that whole thing just by sending the water back. But that would be probably politically unacceptable. I don't know, but it's really, really, for an economist, it's just a sad story.
Missed opportunities. Well, let's go back. I introduced you as the chair of the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, the Bursa. And I am curious, let's talk about economy. Does Israel treat its stock market the same way we do? In other words, are there opening, closing bells at the beginning and end of every day? How does the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange work compared to the United States?
Well, we do have the opening bell, but it's usually reserved for some events. We don't have the events every day. Usually if there's a new listing, or if there's somebody that's celebrating like 20 years of listing, we have all kinds of. Recently we had Mr. Bill Ackman came and gave a speech and opened the trading together with us. There are events around Jeffrey's conference, but it's much more, ceremony. I mean, it's not really connected to anything. Yeah. Trading starts whether you press the button or don't. But Israeli Stock Exchange is unique in the following sense. It's an open limit book, which means that there is, buyers meet sellers directly. And it works like that not only in stocks, which is similar to what it is everywhere, but it's also in bonds, government bonds, corporate bonds, and in derivatives. So in that sense, we do have our ceremonies, but the interesting thing is what is happening with the exchange in the last 2 years. Accidentally, I joined 2 years ago as the chairman. And over the last 2 years, the stock exchange, the indices of Israeli stock exchange were the best performing out of all developed countries, by far.
Did that have something to do with the war?
Well, it should have been, in the opposite direction, but the war is not this length of war, not this intensity of war, but if you look back over at least 25 years, Israeli economy responds very robustly to military conflicts. Usually they're much shorter, but if you look at even quarterly returns of the stock exchange, you would not know that there was a war in the middle. Definitely not annual. If you look over the last 25 years and you look at the annual returns of indices, you would not know that there was anything wrong apart from our 2003 crisis, homemade, and Corona. Even the great financial crisis, you would not see it. I mean, it was basically past us because we didn't have a financial crisis in Israel. We had repercussions from, the rest of the world financial crisis, but we didn't get our own. And so we do have resilience built in because we're just so used to it. However, having said that, it's the first time that we have such a long and intensive war on 7 or whatever fronts. So it is quite surprising that just like any other time, it took about 3 months for the stock market to rebound after October 8th. It was a big question whether to open the market on October 8th. We struggled with it. And we decided that we do not want to give anybody the right to disrupt Israeli economy. I mean, it was a really tough decision because there was certain people who were saying, well, how can you do that? It's a national tragedy. And of course it was a national tragedy. But closing the market would have meant 2 things. First of all, it would have shown the world that our economy can be interrupted. It would have given the benefit to those people that did these atrocities that they managed to do more damage than they already did. And we didn't want to do that. And it didn't collapse. It went down, of course, but it rebounded within less than 3 months. By the end of that year, it was back on the same level. And then it did this comeback, which was quite phenomenal. And it's an interesting question. How come? Because during that time, we had some cases where Israel was boycotted by investors, very few, by the way. But we also saw many, many new investors coming in. You could look at the war from the negative side, of course, huge costs. But with all that, it was about 10% of annual GDP. Because we're a big economy. And we borrowed that very easily because we had a very strong macro position before that. So we now 76% debt to GDP ratio. It's much lower than majority of developed countries. But we still had to borrow that. It was a lot of money. And the defense budget's going to go up. So there is this cost. But vis-a-vis that, Israeli technology has been proven to be unmatched, apart from maybe U.S. technology in certain cases, but in some cases we have something to share. And so we have huge amounts of back orders for our defense industries. During the war, and they were going up, when some of the countries that are making these purchases were criticizing us, they were learning from what we did and buying our equipment and software, etc. And the second thing, we removed the huge security threat. We had, if you look before October 7th, we were quite concerned about 150,000 missiles, some of them precise missiles, in Hezbollah's hands, and uninterrupted path from Iran through Syria to Hezbollah, constantly replenishing. We would bomb them sometimes in Syria, but we didn't catch all of them. We had Hamas, we had Hezbollah, we had Syrians, we had Iranians, we had not, Iraqi militias, etc. So Hezbollah doesn't exist. Well, it exists, but it's nowhere near where it's at, and the Lebanese government is seriously attempting to disarm it. Syria, we all know what happened in Syria. We didn't lift a finger to do that, but indirectly from what happened in Hezbollah, the rebels in Syria became emboldened and did what they did. We know what happened with Hamas. We know what happened with Iran. Okay, Iran, even Europeans reimposed the sanctions. So that's, the side effect of it. So if you look at the Israeli geopolitical and security situation, it's much, much better. And in that situation, once the war is over and the hostages are returned, and hopefully we will not let this happen again ever, to work hard so we remember that and not become complacent. It's an enormous boost to Israeli economy because this security premium was quite big. So that is the positive side. And if we play smart and we play strategically and we regain sort of good relations with some of the countries which are currently very critical of us, and somehow make them immune to this anti-Israeli, anti-Semitic propaganda, we can really get going.
You mentioned investors. There were more investors after the war. Where were those investors coming from? Internally or from other countries?
It's interesting that you asked this question because in 2020, early 2024, a lot of Israeli institutions and individuals moved to S&P 500. And they got pretty hammered twice because S&P 500 was lagging behind Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. So there was some other players coming in because otherwise when you move money, you should see a drop, but you saw an increase. That meant that there others came in. But the more interesting thing is that shekel was very weak when they bought dollars. And now shekel is about 15% stronger. So they lost 15% just on the exchange rate. And so a lot of money that went to S&P came back in the last 6-8 months. So the internal money came back. But on top of internal money, we looked at the behavior of foreign investors right after October 7th. They didn't flee the country. Some of them sold stocks, bought bonds. And then so Israeli institutions made money on that because Israeli institutions bought stocks from them at about 10%, 15% discount. And then when it rebounded, they made money. But that money didn't leave. It stayed in Israel because it was very costly to repatriate it because it was, the shekel was very weak. And so buying dollars back was expensive. And the money slowly went into stocks. And then so people made quite a lot of money on this.
The last topic I want to cover with you is external relations. You mentioned Syria, the potential of collaborating with Syria for water, gas? Electricity. And I presume that you're referring to the possibility of Syria being one of the next members to join the Abraham Accords. That has been mentioned as a possibility.
Maybe, but we can do something much less.
Outside the Accords.
Outside of the Accord, the pre-Accord, we can just create some kind of collaboration, just as we had with UAE. For 15 years before the accord was signed, there was a clear understanding. I was in UAE in Dubai on the day of signing of the accord. I landed in Dubai when they were signing on the White House loan. We landed. It was amazing. It was the degree of warmth that we received from everybody, from ministers in the economy, ministers that came to speak to us, about a dozen, to people in the hotel that were just meeting us. They issued, for example, before signing the accord, there was a regulation passed by UAE that every hotel has to have kosher food. We don't have that in Israel. I mean, hotels mostly have kosher food, but not all of them, and it's not by law. This was like clear, we want these people to feel comfortable. It was truly amazing. I could never imagine that I would come to a country where we didn't have any relations until today and suddenly feel very, very welcome. On every level, on the street, on the, everywhere, in restaurants, and that was quite amazing. And that was the result of us collaborating below the surface for many, many years.
Parity of esteem, yes?
Yeah, they didn't feel...
Suddenly.
Yeah, exactly. The important part when the UAE businessman or ambassador or whatever, you feel completely no chip on the shoulder whatsoever. They feel very proud of their heritage. They're very proud of their achievements. They feel, and you feel at the same level. They feel at the same level, just like you would with Europeans. But we're always felt that there was something like when Arab delegations went, there was something like always tension. I don't know where it was coming, either superiority or inferiority. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But it was always tension. Here, I didn't feel any tension. It was like, we want to do business. We want to learn from you and you to learn from us. And it was, wow.
Same in Bahrain and Morocco?
I haven't been to Bahrain and Morocco. I think Bahrain wanted to do business. We sent a delegation to Bahrain to talk about sort of Israeli technology and how to build an ecosystem. And the same with Morocco. I think it's a bit different. Because we didn't see much going on from these two countries, although Morocco is advancing much faster than Bahrain. There are a lot of interesting proposals coming out of it. There's a genuine desire there. In the last 2 years, of course, it was difficult for anybody to do anything. But interestingly, when almost no European airlines or American airlines were flying to us, Etihad and Emirates were flying to Israel. They were flying.
Past 2 years.
Yeah, they would not stop. And you're just like, wow.
So would you say the Abraham Accords have had a significant impact on Israel's economy at all?
I do not know. I mean, I don't have data on that. The number of Israeli tourists to UAE, it's probably 10 or 20 to 1 to the vice versa. So Israelis with flooding UAE. In terms of investments, there are some technology investments. There's some more infrastructural investments, like they bought 20% of our gas field. There are collaborations between universities and the research centers. So it's hard to measure, but you have to understand, because remember that there was a huge amount of trade and collaboration under the surface. So it surfaced, but that doesn't mean that there was an effect on the economy. Just people suddenly saw it. So you don't know what the delta was. If the same amount of business was suddenly coming out of Jordan, we would have seen, a big surge. So I'm not sure how much. I don't mean to say that there was no impact. I'm just saying that the impact was much more gradual because there was so much already. But I'm sure that it is continuing, and the fact that these airlines were continuing to fly, it indicates that there is a demand and there's a business and there's... Initially, a lot of Israelis thought that this was a money bag, and they would go there and try to raise money and not understanding culture, not understanding. That period is over. The Emiratis conveyed pretty clearly that they're very sophisticated investors. They know how to evaluate it. So they do, when they make investments, these investments make sense rather than just because you wanted to get some money from somebody.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you missed our last episode, be sure to tune in for my conversation with AJC's Director of Congressional Affairs, Jessica Burton. We spoke shortly after receiving the news that a deal had been reached and the hostages from the October 7th Hamas terror attack might finally come home after 2 years in captivity. That dream was partially realized last week when all the living hostages returned, and the wait began for those who were murdered. Thank you for listening. This episode is brought to you by AJC. Our producer is Atara Lakritz. Our sound engineer is TK Broderick. You can subscribe to People of the Pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Podcasts, or learn more at ajc.org/peopleofthepod. The views and opinions of our guests don't necessarily reflect the positions of AJC. We'd love to hear your views and opinions or your questions. You can reach us at peopleofthepod@ajc.org. If you've enjoyed this episode, please be sure to tell your friends, tag us on social media with #PeopleOfThePod, and hop on to Apple Podcasts to rate us and write a review to help more listeners find us. Tune in next week for another episode of People of the Pod.